thank you very much this evening for joining us for the fourth in a series of webinars about inclusivity in sacred space. We are going to be uh, winding up this webinar with a focus on the architecture of Islam. But I want to tell you all, if you haven't been here for the other presentations, I want to tell you a little bit about what this seminar was. And first, I should just start off by saying my name is Michael Crosby, and I am I'm a professor of architecture at the University of Hartford. For many years, I was the editor-in-chief of Faith Informed magazine, and this webinar is presented by Sharing Sacred Spaces, a nonprofit group based in Connecticut that works with congregations to learn more about sacred architecture by sharing their sacred spaces. And I am on the board of directors of the Sharing Sacred Spaces group. So very, very happy to have you with us tonight. This webinar series, the webinar series is called Inclusivity in Sacred Space. And the webinar series has thus far presented 3 viewpoints by designers of sacred space who strive for inclusion and through that, diversity. Tonight is our final designer of sacred space, architect Sharif Senbel, and I'll be telling you a bit about him in a minute. Sacred space has historically been contested space. Access to it has been denied by such factors as gender and race and sexual preference, sometimes by social standing, religious belief itself, physical ability, and also marital status. This webinar series explores how designers of sacred space can challenge exclusivity and promote inclusion, which ultimately enhances diversity in sacred space and beyond the walls of the congregation's physical home. Sacred space is considered as one that has the potential to affirm social justice, inclusion, and diversity, particularly as they are manifest in religious spaces of the 3 Abrahamic faiths. And in this webinar, we have considered the religious spaces of 3 Abrahamic faiths. So I'd like to tell you a bit about our presenter tonight. Sharif Senbel is based in Vancouver, British Columbia, and he was raised by architects. His mother is a regionalist, and his father is a modernist. The University of Oregon, where he attended and studied architecture, focused his education on human-based design and environmental architecture. These influences, plus practicing in Eastern, Western, and Latin cultures, inform his architectural palette. He established Studio Senbel in 1998. The firm primarily works with community clients not typically served by design professionals. The projects are located in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Illinois, and Washington State. Sharif is recognized for his pioneering work developing a contemporary mosque typology in Canada, which we're going to hear a lot more about tonight. And the firm has been recognized with design and community service awards. And I have to say that perhaps one of the mosques that we will see this evening was a winner of a Faith Informed Award. So I'm going to turn it over to Sharif and welcome him. And please please take it over and
Thank you. Thank
you,
Michael. Thank you, Michael, for your introduction. And it's been a long time since we've seen each other. I think the last time was at the jury awards in North Carolina, as we were just talking about. So I wanted to just start by saying that in general, access to mosques is pretty open. That on a typical Friday, The doors to the mosque are open. Anyone can attend. No membership is required. No questions asked. People come in, perform their prayers, and leave. And I've experienced this throughout the world. Having said that, in some parts of the world, that's not necessarily the case for women. This is definitely not scriptural in Islam, but rather a product of local cultural practices. And in fact, in these same countries, you see limitations on women's access to places of worship across various religions. But here in North America, we're very unique. Here, the Muslim communities are a mashup of Muslims from various ethnicities from across the globe. And for a designer, this is both a challenge, but also provides a lot of opportunity for design exploration. So let me just back up and talk a little tiny bit about the evolution of mosques in North America. Um, in the middle of the 20th century, as the Muslim communities, the population of Muslim communities grew, their trajectory in relation to places of worship followed the trajectory of other kind of immigrant groups. They started collectively praying in residential basements, then they started renting small commercial spaces, perhaps in strip malls, and then sort of moved on as they became kind of more established in their communities, started buying churches and converting churches. And as you can imagine, these kinds of kind of makeshift or marginal spaces can be difficult to equitably divide spaces for men and women. So, but as the later part of the 20th century, as more purpose-built mosques were created across North America, these would all typically have dedicated spaces for women. And as I started my practice at the end of the 20th century, I dedicate just having dedicated space for women was not really enough. I mean, on a theoretical level, we all understand that women must have equal access and ownership of the mosque, but on a design level, I wanted to explore and strive to create spaces that felt welcoming to all genders, that you'd feel comfortable moving through the spaces, using the spaces. The act of prayer in a mosque is done separately for women and men, but I always try to create spaces that feel equal for all. And what does that really mean? It means that when I'm designing the building, I pay attention to how the entrances are. I mean, that's the first kind of the portal to the building. So how the entrances for men and women are articulated, hierarchy of space, making sure that spaces don't feel more significant. Some spaces don't feel more significant and more important than others. And that there's a kind of an equity in the design celebration, the design articulation of spaces. And I can't stop there because really ownership of space starts with the engagement in the design process. So I always encourage participation of women and youth in the design process. Sometimes that happened through meetings of like a dedicated women's committee. Other times there were members of the project committee that were women and youth, and occasionally I would get feedback through a proxy on the project team. So I worked on, maybe a dozen mosques. And so every kind of community is a little bit different. There's nuances to every community. And so I sort of have to work with what I have, encourage and teach. I didn't realize, a big part of my design process with mosque would be to sort of, there's a lot of hand holding and a lot of teaching of a process and Islamic architecture, actually. But let me jump in and get right into some projects here. So these ideas that I'm talking about are a little bit more. Um, I'll start with this project here. This is the Al Hidayah Mosque in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, a suburb of British Columbia. And here, we are really kind of explored, like really architecturally expressing the duality of the male and female entrances of both men and women's entrance that are identical but separate, kind of representing the duality of human creation. So really here worked with the client, and they were really excited to really show that, there's equal access for both men and women. This isn't a side door, back door for the women. This is, an equal access to this building, the same kind of level of articulation. They're identical entrances, really. We use these kind of wood tiles around the entrances, kind of design expression. This is, is the same for both. So this was really, we felt that, we couldn't, as my project, this was one of my first projects. So as I moved on through my career, I didn't feel that there was a need to be so explicit, kind of in this duality, that it didn't have to be as explicit. But this, you'll see a little bit of evolution in my projects as I go through, and because you learn from your projects as well. So this same project, where here it's a very tight site. It was a very compressed site, and so the women's space is balconied over the men's prayer space, and for the number of women who attend mosque is usually less than men, and so we opted for a smaller balcony. But what I always say in this project, I know it's a bit corny, but I say the women got half the space, but they got twice the view, and so. But one of the things I actually learned from this project was that some of what we did in the mihrab, in the mimbar, is unless you're upstairs right on the edge of the balcony, you're not as engaged with the front mimbar wall. And so you'll see in later project, I started to try to pull that up and sort of to engage the women's space a little bit more with the mimbar. So I'll jump over to another project. This is Al Salam Mosque in Burnaby, BC. So this is the outside view, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this because invariably every project I work on, every mosque project, there's somebody on the project committee who, brings up the dome. We've got to have a dome. How can we have a mosque without a dome? And my response is always the same, is that if you put the dome over a prayer space, it creates a hierarchy. And so is that, the space with the dome becomes kind of more celebrated, more dominant, and so if you put it over the men's prayer space, then it's going to feel more important, more dominant, and you'll see that the typology that evolved, it really is a typology of balconies over a balconied space over or part of a larger space. And so the putting a dome over part of a balcony that really doesn't work. So here, the compromise was we did an entrance portal with a dome, and this way everybody gets to come through under this portal and experience the dome. And so it's not exclusive to any one gender, but it's there for all to experience as they come into the mosque. I want to tell a little bit of a story about this, what happened in the design process, because I think it's quite interesting. So this project was designed about 25 years ago. So and at the time I was, again very engaged in the design process, really getting the community involved. And one of the big ways I do this is by bringing up various design options, proposals, rather than coming up with a single proposal and saying this is what I think is best. By just providing any kind of alternative proposal, people feel that they can engage more and say, okay, well, I like this here, I like this there. So this is a similar process. We had we presented various options for the prayer hall, the men's prayer hall, the women's prayer hall. And then after one of these meetings, I got asked by two young Muslim sisters if I could meet with them separately. So I mean, they were young. I was probably just about their age as well, since this was about 25 years ago. But anyways, we had a discussion. They told me about what they called their secret agenda. They literally, their words, their secret agenda, how they wanted to create a space where men and women can pray in the same space side by side. And they wanted me to bring this up as a proposal, and that I should design the space in such a way that it can work that way. And I immediately said, look, I don't work with hidden agendas. That's not really the design process. We're not, this is an open process. So I said, look, why don't we bring this? Let's talk about it with the other women and see what they have to say. So, and I brought up a couple of different options, and for the rest of the women's team, and it was an emphatic from the older women. It was an emphatic no. We do not want to share a space. We want our own space. We want our own space clearly defined, where we can determine what happens. We can determine the uses, we can determine access to it. And we don't want to be in a situation where there's this choreography of this dance around the space. And if there's more men, then the women get pushed back. And then they didn't want that. They were very clear that they didn't want any of that. They didn't want the politics of space. They just wanted their space clearly defined, where it's and not to share a space. So I think it was clear what they wanted, and we proceeded with that. But as sort of a nod to these young sisters, I decided to put, and you'll see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's a series of doors. There's two doors on the side here and two doors in the back here. And my rationale for that was like, I don't know. Who knows? 100 years down the line, maybe they'll divide it down the middle. Maybe they'll divide it front to back. But at least the project could grow and adapt, if future generations decided that this is how they want to participate in prayer. So I always find that story, very enlightening, and it informed a lot of my design decisions in the future, knowing that this whole notion of battle for space within a mosque is a thing. So here, still on the Al Salam Mosque, here the space, the women's space doesn't necessarily sit within the same kind of balconies over. There's sort of balconies behind it. And so what I try to do here is to create this continuous ceiling treatment here that extends over both spaces, with these glulam timbers and the skylights. And the idea here is it's kind of allegorical of a single expansive sky under which both men and women pray and communicate equally to their creator. So the idea was to create a single ceiling treatment that extends over both spaces, and that we all feel, everybody in the space feels that they're praying under one sky. So here, this is the Prince George Islamic Center, and this was kind of midway, kind of through my career, where a lot of sort of the design concepts were gelling, the idea of this balconied space within a single space, so that there's no hierarchy of spaces. Um, and here again, it's sort of extending the front wall, so the mihrab mimbar wall, so it comes up and it kind of engages with the women's space. So this is kind of very typical, as I moved on, as a solution that worked well for in most cases. And I just wanted to one of the early on, one of the comments or from building committee members about this balconied spaces, that they'd always say that well, the kids are often with their mothers upstairs, and they're playing around, making noise, and it disrupts the congregation, etc., etc. And I don't have, obviously I don't go up to and sit in the women's space, and I don't have any sisters, so all the feedback I get is from my mom. Um, and my mom would have a terrible time in these closed off, dedicated spaces, in purpose-built mosques, where the kids are running wild and making noise, and everybody downstairs is clueless to what's going on up there. So she would have a really tough time listening to the sermon, and it would always be quite frustrated. So my comments when these kinds of issues came up, I would say, look, the whole idea is that we're all praying together. The children shouldn't necessarily just be upstairs. And in fact, the children should learn the etiquettes and the proper manner in the mosque. And they were like, oh, humming and hawing. And what happened in most cases, is that there would be a short adjustment period where the kids, who moved into this new, nice mosque, would have to understand that they're part of a larger congregation, and it was the building not the parents, teaching the kids what the proper manners and etiquettes and behavior in a mosque is. And so these kinds of issues quickly dissipated. So and this is a project, this is Fort McMurray Islamic Center up in northern Alberta. This is a project that's ongoing and isn't complete. But here, unlike some of these other urban projects, which are on very kind of tight sites and a lot of spaces have to be stacked. Here, I don't want to call it suburban, but it's a small town, Fort McMurray, and they have quite a big property here. And so you see we were able to kind of have the two entrances left and right, the men on the left and the women on the right here, and so it's afforded, the lobby is split down the middle, and it's very sort of like, it's easier when you have a lot of space. It's easier. The choreography of space, the circulation through the space, is a lot easier. Um, and I also want to touch on one thing is that a lot of these mosques, when we're talking about entrances and maybe separate entrances, this really is only an issue when there's large groups of people during congregational time on Friday or on Eid prayers or in Ramadan. Most of the time when, day-to-day and daily prayers, uh, men and women can go through either entrance. It's not as prescriptive. It's just when large groups of people that they start to, it's more comfortable to separate to go to their individual prayer spaces. And one of the things that it's hard to show here in sort of photographs, but one of the big things that we work on is circulation and looking at different scenarios, different events, different types of prayers, and look at how the circulation of men and women would happen, going from one space to the other. A place like this where there's a social hall, obviously there'd be not obviously, but in many cases, they'd both be men and women in these events sharing a space, and how the circulation works, and to make it, because making the circulation work well, without any kind of bottlenecks, without any conflicts, makes the space a lot more comfortable to be in and to move through. Um, and then I was gonna sort of finish off with, this is one of my latest projects here. This is in Ottawa, in Canada, a suburb of Ottawa. And here it's sort of, it's just a little kind of animation here that I'm gonna run that kind of has a lot of the design concepts that I talked about. And I'll sort of like run it and then sort of talk you through it here. Um, so yeah, as I said, this is in Canada. And the entrance is here. So this is the prayer hall with that corner window, and the member window, which you'll see inside. And here, not so explicit in terms of the entrances, but the women on the left, the men on the right here, through these under this canopy. This is the men's entrance, going through and with the sort of multi-purpose gymnasium on the left and the prayer hall on the right. And here, this is where you see, we're starting to, the minbar is really pulled up and engages vertically. There's the women's balcony up top. So you see the really kind of like the celebration, the articulation of that minbar is brought right through so that there's some engagement um, on the women's level with that important element in the front of the prayer hall. So yeah, that's I'm not sure if how much time that was. How much time was that, Mike? Was that shorter than I
Uh,
should be?
no,
It
it
felt
was it was
shorter.
it was pretty much on just over 25 minutes, actually, which is exactly what I asked you to
Oh,
ask.
okay. Well,
Yeah,
perfect. I it felt short. I don't know why,
I've
but
got a couple questions as you were speaking about your work. A couple things made sort of rose to the surface. Um, you were just talking about uh, this last project has got quite a significant minaret at the front, and I'm wondering whether you get either any kind of questions or pushback or anything about minarets because they've kind of lost their reason for being, I suppose, just as a place where you call prayer. But they do perform a function of giving the place an identity. It's important to the community to see it, I think. And I'm just wondering whether you could talk about that a little bit, the sort of the function of the minaret today.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that does come up. And I just want to say right off the bat, I love designing minarets.
Good.
And you'll see, all kinds of minarets I explore. And then okay, so I always say I do realize that, the minarets have lost one of their functions. The call to prayer was one of the functions, and the height of a minaret was in relation to the size of the neighborhood that it served. So the call to prayer, if it was just a smaller, the minaret would be shorter. But it was also in urban settings, it was sort of a landmark or a signifier as to, this is a mosque. And this is really when I have project team members are always asking for the dome. I'm like, the dome, how can you have a mosque without a dome? And I'm like, look at Mike, look at you behind you. The first dome is not mosques, or like that's they're Roman, right? Like they're and that the minarets are one of the unique sort of like building elements, architectural elements that are specific to mosques.
Yeah.
Um, and I know they have been politicized in certain countries, and for sure. But for me, it's always if you really want, because a lot of times my architectural style is not immediately. If you take out the minaret, a lot of times it's not clear that these are mosques, not necessarily. And
Yeah.
so um, and I don't have a problem with that. I don't
Yeah.
have, but a lot of times the community, they've worked hard. They've raised a lot of money. They want to be present in the community, in the
Yeah.
urban fabric. They want to be seen as Muslim. This is a Muslim institution. We're here. We're part of Canada. We're part of the United States. They really want to, and so this is their kind of like this is their architectural expression. So really that's and like the one, I want to, can I bring back my
Oh,
images? 'Cause,
sure. Go
yeah,
ahead.
let's
Yeah.
do that. So this is my least favorite minaret. First minaret, I mean, I think the building would have been way nicer without it, to be quite honest. And this is they call this the Jetsons Mosque for some reason. So but this one really works well in the urban fabric. It's in a kind of a transition zone. There across the street, there's kind of an industrial zone, and there's a multifamily zone. So it's kind of in a transition zone, and I think it works well to anchor this project and to signify that this is a mosque. Um, this was really fun to do. This is a totally, there's no steel in there other than the rebar. So this is a totally load-bearing minaret. It got a masonry design award because it's completely load-bearing brick, clay brick. So, and obviously you can't see it here, but you can see right through it. It's completely hollow. So you can see the glass, you can
Oh yeah.
see corner to corner through the glass. So all corners. So, um, and this one is one of my favorite because it's kind of integrated. It's not the best photo because the side view shows it. It's really well integrated. And this one, the dome, the cupola, I collaborated with a boat builder. And so this is a fiberglass kind of mold that was done in 4 parts in Victoria in British Columbia and brought up on a truck in 4 parts and bolted together. So this one was really fun. So as you can see, I really enjoy these. Doing them
Yeah.
in different ways, and I think they work. They're it's purely, they're spending money purely on architectural expression. There's absolutely,
Yeah.
that's the only function really saying, this is a mosque, really.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
It's an identifier. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a signifier of
yeah,
their presence.
yeah,
And I think that that is very important. And
yeah,
it's kind of the same way the steeple operates on many Christian buildings, right?
yeah.
It's
Although they do ring their bells occasionally still.
yeah. So I'm going to invite our audience here, members. You can either raise your hand or just take yourself off mute if you have a question for Sharif, or you can type your question in the chat. And let me we have a question from Nusha here, and it says she's curious about why the entrance should be separate for each gender, and why not just one single entrance. And is how can what is that an ask from the client that they have two separate entrances, or?
Yeah, typically they are. Typically it is. And I think I sort of answered it where, the separate entrances really don't become critical or until there's a big congregation. And so there's, large amounts of people shuffling in and out of the spaces in short amount of time. And I think, and it's usually as I mentioned with that about the women not really wanting to fight over access, to fight over space. They want to have their dedicated space, and so most of the time, on a normal, a day, people don't, it's not that the women aren't allowed to go through this door or that the men aren't allowed to go through this door. It's just an issue um, of comfort. And you have to also understand that, these communities, as I said, are a multiplicity of different ideas. And so it's, I can't speak for any other religion, but, you're standing side by side and you don't really know there's a lot of different ideas of what people's roles are. And there's some conservative members of the congregation. There's more sort of liberal members, and they're all praying together. And so you have to sort of um, understand that there's these kinds of different ideas, and that you have to be able, if you say, okay, I want to build, a mosque with a single entrance, you are working with a really, enlightened or, future looking project team, and they want to do one single entrance, and, this is what we want to do. We want to have, and everybody share this space, you know, 5 years down the road, there's a new building committee,
Mhm.
I mean, because these are all community, they're voted in. There's not, so there's a new building committee, and they decide they want to change everything. And then what happens? Then I've done a disservice, then I've done it, then it's like, okay, we'll open up this back door for the women to come in so that they can come up this back stair to get up to their space, or create a new space. And so I have to understand where the community's at now,
Yeah.
and make it open for everyone and comfortable for everyone, with the understanding that it may change later. But I don't want to kind of like, restrict it so that at some point, it becomes, in the future, if somebody who's, has a different ideology or a team, and that happens. I get that. And so I want the buildings to be able to work regardless of who teach people, and regardless of who's running it. It can still function, unless they obviously barricade things or whatever. But really, if it just stands alone, it will work.
Yeah. We this past Friday, well, a week ago tomorrow, I'm teaching a graduate studio, architecture studio, and we have just started a mosque project in architecture in our architecture studio. So there's a mosque that we have visited in Connecticut for a number of years, and this mosque has one large, very elaborate sort of ceremonial door at the very center. And then there's a men's entrance on one side, and there's a women's entrance on the other side that go directly into the place for removal of the shoes and so forth. Um, and the president of the mosque says that basically the central doors are open for just funerals and weddings, and other times, most of the other times, they're just closed. And I'm wondering if is that kind of scenario fairly common in some of the mosques you've worked in, or do they just have men's and women's entrances and no central entry?
Yeah, there's no main entrance. No,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, that's you create one single main entrance, and you know who's going to take it.
Yeah. Well, in the case of this mosque, it's locked, so you can't get
Yeah,
it.
so that
So you
yeah.
can't use it unless you're dead or you're getting married. So
Yeah, so yeah, and so that's and that's yeah, and I'm always working with this idea of duality,
yeah.
as opposed to a kind of a single thing, where okay, there's a subsidiary. I'm always working with the idea of duality of spaces within, duality of entrances, everything, and then and for all these spaces to be equal. And it goes back to the whole idea of the dome, of putting a dome over one space or another, and yeah.
Yeah. We have a question from Karim Youssef, who says, "Thank you."
Karim Yusuf.
Yes, Karim Youssef. Okay. Um,
Yeah, I
uh,
see that he's asking about calligraphy.
yes, yes, yes.
I
Please.
mean, yeah, we use calligraphy in many of our projects. And many of the projects I showed today had calligraphy, both in the masonry, in the glass etching. Yeah, I mean, calligraphy is a big part of my design process, and bringing that kind of that a layer of Islamic identity to the building, for sure. I
Mhm.
mean, that's used, and I really enjoy using calligraphy because it's used across all types of architecture throughout the world. You see it
Yeah.
used in different ways, in tiles and in woodwork, and even rugs, and yeah, fabrics, and so yeah.
You've worked with a glass artist to do some really beautiful etchings on some of the projects that you've designed, where the mihrab is looking out into the fields behind the.
Yes, yeah. No, all the yeah, those are all my designs. The,
Yeah.
all the glass etchings, all the calligraphy, geometric patterns, they're all our design. And then we pass on the digital files to the sandblaster etching, and they do it. Yeah, and we're doing something similar in this Ottawa project.
Yeah, no, I think that just the way the calligraphy is sort of presented as a something you see through to something else, I think
Yeah.
is it's really very poetic about sacred text, basically.
And also, it's a celebration of light, which is,
Yeah,
analogous to God's kind of like, a guiding light. And so
yeah.
when light comes through these patterns, these calligraphy, they're really, it's a way of celebrating that gift to humanity.
Martha, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah, so your work is just gorgeous, just really beautiful.
Thank you.
And I'm particularly struck by the creativity with the Mirab, in the at least two of them you pointed out how the design is really meant to create a kind of inclusive line between the women's and men's sections, and that I just think that's really quite lovely, and also um, because of the centrality of that in a mosque, that you've prioritized it that way in your architectural thinking, I think is really fascinating. My question has to do with whether so where I live in Iowa, and um, so I know about mosques and Islamic centers, the difference being the Islamic centers have all the educational rooms, social rooms, etc. The mosques are usually very small, rented facilities. Is that the and so Nebraska and Iowa, each immigrant group has its own,
I
and
see.
Mm.
that actually parallels exactly what happened with immigration to Iowa of Christians, so that in the town where I live, there were 6 Catholic churches. Every single one came from a different immigrant country in Europe. Yeah. So that has kind of happened. The same thing has happened with Muslim immigration in the late 20th and
Mhm.
early 21st century. So your talk was emphasizing gender. In my town, there are only 2, and the division was based on gender, the different understandings of the two of people within the community about the role of women. And there was a separation, and now there's 2 facilities, and it's ethnically mixed, so that you have immigrants from a variety of countries. But their deciding factor where they were going to go was based on women's roles. So
Wow.
what I'm wondering is if you have ethnic diversity, if in your experience you've had to navigate that with your architectural design, because that also can implicate gender, but perhaps the ethnicity is, especially with the Islamic other functions of social life and religious education for children, the ethnicity could trump the gender questions. So have you had any, is that part of the Canadian conversation at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, but I first I'd say that overall, most of my projects have been mixed ethnic backgrounds. And so, and as I said in sort of in the preamble to my, that can be both a challenge and kind of an opportunity, because what happens is, and this happens often, is, you know, a lot of, especially immigrants, everyone comes and everybody sitting around the table has their own vision of what a mosque is, you know, based on their hometown. And
Mhm.
so what I'm always trying to say is like, look, you guys, you've left these other places. Here we are together. You know, we're not going to create an Islamic architecture based on where you came from. This is an opportunity for all of us collectively to create something, a new typology, a new type of Islamic architecture in this new area. You know, we're ethnically diverse. If you go home, back home, you guys are all the same. And so, and then I'll ask each one of them, you know, what they think a mosque, you know, the guy is like, oh no, the minaret's got to be round. Oh no, the minaret's got to be square. Oh no, we've got to have a green dome. Oh no, we've got to have arches. Oh no. And so right away they realize that they've all got these different ideas of what it should be, and that we need to sit together and figure out collectively what it is that we need here, for this, you know, for the children, for the new generation in this new context, as a minority. They've all come from, mostly come from Muslim dominant countries. So this is a whole new paradigm, a whole new dynamic. And the gender question, absolutely comes into it, and, for sure, it's more challenging with, the older generation. But throughout, regardless of ethnicity, the newer generation, the first, the kids born here, they have a very different idea. And people quite quickly realize that they have to adapt, otherwise they're going to lose this generation, because
Yeah.
they have no patience for, like, the girls are just not going to show up, to the mosque, and there's going to be less participation. And so that's kind of like the superpower of, like, this mashup of ethnicities, but you have to engage, you have to be able to show people that this is how it is, and sit people together and have that discussion. And if I just sit and I have my own thing, I'm not gonna, and it's happened, there was, very early on in my career, there was some, group that didn't want, we wanted to separate building. I can't remember the details, but basically didn't want. And I said, look, I'm not going to participate in this. You can find another architect. I'm not going to participate in a project where my mom can't come and pray, where, it's like, it's just not going to happen. And so they quickly backed down, and, but yeah. The
Yeah.
space was less than ideal for me. It was the only women's space it was still over the men's, but it wasn't open, an open balcony. It was like a glass, like it was closed with windows. That was like, uh, kind of like the least successful project for me.
Mhm.
But it was only one, so I feel.
What you're describing, this idea of, oh, it's got to have this, it's got to have that. I mean, every kind of faith community I've ever heard of has these same kind of things, right? The Catholics, it's got to have this, it's got to have that, or the Episcopalians, they have to have this. You can't have a synagogue with this. So this is across all belief systems. This idea that the perfect building to worship in has got to have something that you grew up with. And I'm wondering whether you have ever started projects with a faith community by giving like a talk about the history of mosques in the
Oh, everyone.
Yeah,
I
because
haven't.
they don't work for them.
I can pull it up. I can pull it up right now. I have a PowerPoint ready to go.
Yeah,
It's like that's what I was saying. Like, I didn't realize education would be such a big part of it. And
yeah,
I show them, like I show them mosques from different parts of the world and how, they use the local materials, they respond to the local climate, and how, domes came because they wanted to span large spaces with masonry units, and it wasn't just like an architectural element. Oh yeah. And how, the mosques, from China to Timbuktu, they're all different. Mud brick versus wood versus masonry versus
uh,
stone. Oh yeah, I have it. Almost all my project. It's like I realized it's best to start that way, sort of said deconstruct their ideas first, and
exactly.
and and then and then they feel part of like this kind of like journey of like
Yeah,
creating something new, and not feeling kind of shackled by tradition,
yeah,
right?
yes,
What they think is tradition.
yes.
Um,
Excellent. I'm glad you kind of clarified exactly what you go through at the beginning of a project, because that really will open eyes. And most people, they're just not aware of the architectural history of their own faith tradition. So, but all they know is what they had when they were children. That's what they associate a mosque or a church or a synagogue with. So.
But then, the examples in Muslim countries now are not much better. They're like
Yeah.
a hodgepodge of like a collage of like, oh, let's get this from here and get this from there, and it's like it's pretty sad, unfortunately. I think there's a little bit in the last few years. Is I've seen some nice mosque projects in Muslim dominant countries, but for a long time it was pretty dire, but I think there's some better. I see another question I don't know we have from Karen about
Yeah,
sharp edges. Roof
I
edges
was
are.
gonna ask if you wanted to address that one. Uh,
I'm not sure what Karen means by sharp edges. Maybe I can bring up maybe Karen can let me know. Does that
Oh,
do you,
I just I'm sorry. Well, I thought everything looked beautiful, and I thought some of them looked very modern, some of the architecture. And so I don't know anything about architecture. This is very new to me. But I am an
So is
artist.
it is this sharp edges?
Yes, yes. That's what I meant.
Okay, yeah. Clean lines. Yeah. I guess that's my own aesthetic, really. And that's just like a personal thing, that's just, after a while, I think, there is kind of like that art, the sort of artist in you where that it's, creates, you know, um, it has to be my palette too, I guess. It's not, there's no specific reasons, but yeah, I mean, it's just, the composition of building elements and stuff like that. It's just a purely personal thing. It's, how roof lines and walls and fenestration, windows, all that sort of thing. How they come together becomes, kind of just personal kind of thing, really, more than anything. I can't really. It's not intentional necessarily. Like I want, sharp, but I think that's just my aesthetic. It must be.
Thank
uh,
you.
I wanted to point out that Nushin has sort of brought up the fact that many of the works that you showed this evening and are included in Tammy Gaber's book, The Great Divide, which is a book about Canadian Islamic architecture, mosque architecture in Canada. And she does talk. There's actually a whole chapter there that is focused on gender and many of Sharif's um, projects are shown in that chapter. So that's something, there's a link here in the chat to ordering it, I guess, on Amazon or whatever. But you might want to check that out as well. And also, Tammy has done an interview and a presentation for Sharing Sacred Spaces. That's also part of the collection of the many videos you can watch from the Sharing Sacred Spaces website. So you might want to also check that out as well. So we are past 8 o'clock, and I want to thank our presenter for showing us the work that he's been engaged in for many years, and trying to break down barriers between people and genders in the many of the mosques that he's designed. I also want to thank all of you this evening for being with us. And Martha, do you have something you'd like to add? Oh, you're clapping. Okay.
Thanks, Martha. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Appreciate
Okay.
it.
Okay. Oh, and Sharif, we have a question from Sophia, who wants to know how they can get a hold of you, how they can get in touch with you. And I would say if you just Google Studio Senbel, you will find his website, and all of his work is on his website, and also contact information is on his website as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, someone's just posted the website there.
Okay, great. Thank you all for being here this evening and taking part of this. And please, if you haven't seen the other um, webinars that we did on this topic, you will be able to see them through the Sharing Sacred Spaces website. Thanks again. And
Thanks for the invite.
okay, bye-bye.